Morning, everyone. So we're back. We decided not to do one last week because we didn't think anybody was going to get up at 7:30 on a Good Friday, and I think that was a good decision because I didn't get up at 7:30 on a Good Friday, that's for sure. Joined this morning by Alex and Martin. I think David's away somewhere exotic, isn't he, in Europe? I'm going to say Prague. It's
Yes.
kind of like Prague, somewhere kind of
I
Eastern
forgot
Europe.
where, but he's
I,
definitely on holiday
I,
until
I,
tomorrow.
I think it was Budapest rather than Prague. I think
They all pretty much the same
so,
place.
somewhere overseas.
Somewhere with nice beer.
He's
Yes.
having a nice break before the last bit of campaigning.
So you've been keeping David busy, I guess, on the campaign trail then, Alex?
Yeah, definitely. I want his back there the last few days. So I feel I'm doing those daily videos every day with Luke, but there's 6 days left as of today, so it's getting very close.
Who's told him off for going on a jolly in the middle of the election campaign?
No one. I actually think it's so intense at the moment that if I could, I would actually have a few days off, but I really cannot at the moment. I actually think some people, for example, on the Wednesday before, some people take the day completely off and just keep their energy for polling day. I never had this experience before because I always ran for campaigns with very little, very small numbers of volunteers. So always on Wednesday, I was doing the last leaflets, or I was really trying to respond to the very last emails in the general election myself. But I think if you have one of those very well supported, targeted campaigns, you should really take that Wednesday off and then be actually feeling okay on polling day.
So I tell you the day when I nearly killed my agent when I was stood for Parliament was polling day. So I was, as you always do, I was told to go off and help deliver some leaflets in a target seat in the south of Nottingham the night before. And they basically said, you've got two choices. You can either deliver them on election day or you can get them all out the door the night before. And I listened to, I decided I was going to get them all done the night before so I could get a lay in the next day. And then do some stuff in my own constituency. And I was up until 2 o'clock in the morning delivering leaflets, and it was quite good. I was listening in between getting in my car. I was listening to Ian Lee on the radio, who's a big Kiss fan, and it was and Kiss were playing that night as well in Birmingham. And anyway, and I did all my leaflet until 2 o'clock in the morning. Went to bed, and I stayed overnight at my agent's house. And after 5 in the morning, he was knocking me up. I'd had 3.5 hours sleep, and he was knocking me up to go and do a tour of the polling stations. And I nearly bloody killed him.
Yeah, man.
I mean, leaflets at 2 o'clock seems very a very good skill to have. I have to say, I'm actually quite terrified. Often, on the eve of poll, I try to finish quite early because I think, especially in very residential areas, I don't know how to do the leafleting very quietly. So I feel if I rock up at midnight, you have to have a skill to do it quietly, and you have dogs around and so on. It will be the end of.
Yeah, if you wake my dogs up at 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm not voting for you. I don't care who you are. So that's probably why.
Yeah, I just decided I wanted to get it done. It was probably not the most sensible decision, but it was a decision, and it's one of those things. But I don't think I woke anybody's dogs up, but I nearly killed my agent, who was a nice chap, by the way.
Well, that's good. I think it depends where it is. Some of my friends are canvassing in those, London boroughs where every single thing is a massive block of flats. So I think, yes, they're doing the leafleting at 1 a.m. is fine. But doing leafleting in a small village at 1 a.m., I would be terrified and I wouldn't do it ever.
Yeah. So I haven't delivered any leaflets this year. Not because I'm lazy, because I'm not standing, which I think it's been very nice watching from the outside, having decided I didn't want to be a county councillor anymore. Go on.
What has amazed me is the lack of leaflets I've had through my door. Genuinely, whether people are missing it, I've had Conservative leaflets through my door. But I can't recall getting any others.
Is that because, as usual, everybody think Whittlesea's going to be Conservative, and they just don't bother? That's the way it's been in the past, isn't it? So for district council elections in Sawtry, we had Simon Bywater and Ross Martin get in unopposed. Yeah. And I guess that's because people don't want to target their resources, and they've probably got paper candidates, which is a bit sad.
The issue is you've got to start somewhere, and if they really want to start making inroads in Whittlesea, they've got to get themselves organised, and they've got to get themselves campaigning. So people are not just used to getting, a polling card or some information in the post from the returning officer saying these are your candidates or whatever. You really need people to be knocking on doors, getting a feel for where the vote is, and and getting themselves organised, because otherwise, Finland remains as a conservative kingdom, a badly led conservative kingdom forever.
So
until the government reorganisation happens,
or until Reform snag a few seats, which I think is a prospect, isn't it?
They came very close in 2013. Ralph Butcher's seat was closer than mine, but they did come close. So it wouldn't surprise me if they're on a bit more of a high this time. There's a possibility, and the social media around Whittlesey, to me, suggests that Reform are there or thereabouts. But all the commentary from anybody political is Reform, but that's not untypical. They do overperform on social media.
Yeah, that's true. That's what I noticed as well. And also because some of the local groups, it doesn't mean that everyone commenting is from the local area. So I'm quite active on the Huntington and the St. Ives groups. And for example, you get you post something and you get, let's say, 10, 20 comments saying vote Reform or whatever. You look on the profiles, not everyone lives in Huntington or St. Ives. There are people living in Ramsey, in Yaxley, in other areas as well. So it's not really an indication of are those actually your voter base or not. So without knocking on doors and actually getting data in a different way, it's difficult to just rely on social media, although the momentum is there. I mean, a lot of people are at least more open to comment how they're voting. If they're voting Reform, it's a more open conversation.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's true. 2013, a lot of the UKIP voters were hidden voters. That people that wouldn't tell you who they were voting for, or they would say one thing and do another. That inevitably there was loads of that in 2013. And I think people are a little bit more overt this time around.
I noticed this as well.
It might mean they do better.
Well, we'll talk about people being overt Reform voters. Very early on in the election campaign, in the first week or so, I was in town going to the dentist. And I suddenly got a message saying Nigel Farage is in Market Square. So I pegged it down there. Unfortunately, I missed him. But Nigel Farage did a walk around in St. Neots Town Centre. And then Reform had a little polling session on Market Square, and I sat and watched them doing their polling session. And I went and have a chat with them as well, because you do, don't you? And I wished them good luck and all that kind of stuff. But the number of people
try and shut them down.
No, obviously not. No, and actually, I think they expected me to, because at that stage they didn't. I think that was before the candidates were announced, and they thought that I was standing against them. Yeah, and so they were a little bit hostile to me. But I just said to them, "Look, it's good for democracy, isn't it, to have everybody represented and have a political party out in Market Square, getting a leader down, trying to make a fuss. I think is generally good for democracy." But having seen the effects on people of having seen Nigel Farage in St. Neots, people are going all gooey-eyed. People who I wouldn't otherwise have suspected would ever vote Reform, and getting signing Nigel Farage posters. And I think that there is this kind of groundswell of sentimentality for the bloke. He's obviously very good at what he does.
And I genuinely don't get the opposition approach to Reform at the moment. I think it's astonishing the way everybody's fawning, trying to be more like Reform. The Conservatives especially, the total failure to create distance between Reform and the Conservative Party, and trying to get closer and closer. All they're doing is giving credibility to Reform the more they do it. And if it was my campaign with the Conservatives, I'd be putting leaflets through the door that basically say vote Reform, get Trumpism, because Farage is talking about and has talked about a lot of things that are dear to Trump's heart. And you look at the chaos that he's created, not just in America, but across the world. And do we want that sort of chaos in the UK? We need to be honest about it. As an example, Farage has touted flat taxation in the past. It was a UKIP policy, which is a flat taxation. Farage has talked about creating an equivalent of Doge in every department in the UK, in UK government. And you look at the chaos that Doge is causing across America, and has caused across America. Some of it is being tempered by the courts now, where they're listening. You look at, Trump's approach to the way he has kicked people out of America. You could go on and on about the similarities. The other one is Farage making a policy, which he did under UKIP, out of a thing called the Laffer curve, which is an economic theory. It's not an economic policy. As an example, the Laffer curve is about, for those that are watching, the Laffer curve is about reaching and understanding the point at which you tax somebody of wealth to the extent where they will basically start leaving the country. That's what the Laffer curve is about. How high can you tax the wealthy before we start creating an exodus, is what it's about. And it's an economic theory. It's something that should guide economic policy. It's not an economic policy in itself. You look at all those things and you see the similarities. Why the heck aren't the political parties talking about these things? They're almost, doffing the cap to UKIP, to Reform. It's the same thing, and I'm absolutely baffled by it.
Yeah, I agree. It's really strange as well, like how few, a very small number of like MPs in Parliament who actually tackle those arguments. So, like, I'll give like some non-partisan examples. Like our local MP here in Huntington, Ben Obsijetsky, often comments against reform. So Farage comes up with this, we'll do this Minister of Deportation. He rightly asked, like, what is the difference between like the current border security minister we already have? Mike Tapp on the Labour side, like, agree or disagree with his line on this. He's like often challenging reform, like, on immigration and so on from his perspective. But I think there are very, very few MPs who are prepared to actually openly on social media, the media, or in Parliament actually challenge reform, whether they're Labour or Conservatives. And this doesn't help. Most people are like, oh, I better not say anything because I don't want to lose my votes to reform, which is not helpful for democracy at all.
But I think, first of all, I would expect Ben to get it right, by the way, because I think he's a cracking MP. I think he's a
smooth operator, isn't he? I've been really impressed by his social media presence.
I think he's a leader in the waiting. I've thought that from when I met him. So I would expect him to get it right. But I'll say it now: vote reform, get Trumpism. There you go. And understand that is what you're heading towards. It's that sort of chaos.
Yeah, but I think that's the right thing to actually challenge. And you can challenge it like, some people challenge it based on facts, others based on the rhetoric, like, Mike Tapp goes more into the narrative side and so on. But at least, you're saying something on the topic. I find it's like, if you're knocking on the door and someone says, well, like I have this particular view on immigration, the response seems to be for most people just moving to meet that particular view, even if you don't have that view yourself, rather than either trying to persuade, oh, I actually have a different view on this, or actually open the discussion to say, why do you think this way? Let's explore, like, why, what led to you to
and this is where politicians have to be bolder and have to be a little bit stronger. The narrative has to be actually not quite this, but actually you're talking tribe. Is a reality, because in 10 years' time, people are going to be clamoring for more immigration in this country because of the demographic issue we've got with older people. And they need to understand that. Yes, we need to get immigration right, but it's like all of this stuff. Politicians increasingly are afraid to tell truth to people, and that's part of what their role is. Is to tell truth to people, and that means that if they disagree, they need to politely disagree with somebody, and that's a reality, and it disappoints me that more and more people don't. And I will say this about a role of a councillor. And if you're standing for council and watching this, understand it. Yes, your role as a councillor is to represent your community in the council, but your job is also to represent your council to your community. And that means that when difficult messages are there, part of what you have to do is explain why that message is there and why a difficult decision has been made.
I've just got to pop off for 2 minutes. I'll be back in a sec.
Yeah, no worries, Stephen. Yeah, also what I find really interesting as well is that we'll see after the results of the local elections, not that this will change the approach in my view, but it also doesn't work. So in addition to whether you think it's the right or the wrong thing not to react or to present an alternative view, it also doesn't work. The Conservatives are losing support, are keeping on losing support. Labour is losing support as well nationally. So actually either of the parties moving to more towards reform, whether it's like on immigration policy or on other type of policy or narrative, is not actually winning votes back. So that's really interesting to see what is the reason behind it.
Where does it leave you in 10 years' time? And I feel like this about a lot of politics. You know, as a good example, cutting the overseas aid budget. You know, if you look at what's happened with America at the moment and with Trump as an example, one of the things we need to be starting to do is winning over and winning friends internationally. And at the same time, you know, we're cutting the overseas aid budget, which will help us to do it. There's two things: get overseas aid right, make sure it's delivered in the right places, make sure it's done efficiently. And if you want to know how to do that, read Rory Stewart's book. But you know, as well as that, you've got to use it in the right way so you can win friends and allies. And especially when, from a peace perspective, as a country, we seem to be, well, we're not heading towards peace, we're heading towards war. And there's a reality. And if that war spreads, we need friends. And because you can bet your bottom dollar, if they're not our friends, China are trying to make them friends, Russia are trying to make them friends. And, you know, we should be using overseas aid for that as well. And you know, and that does mean, yes, with some countries that, you know, that have got difficult leadership and everything else, but it's not the leadership you need to win, it's the people. And the more you know, the less we start to make those difficult arguments and instead, you know, go to a you know, race to the bottom with overseas aid, the worse it's going to be. And we've got to start looking at those things.
Yeah, but it's also, I find it very reactive as well. It's exactly as you say, it's like without seeing the long-term implications or choosing not to see the long-term implications at this particular time. Let's say the citizenship rule changes. You have the immigration, the border security debate. The opposition puts an argument being something along the lines of we shouldn't let people who are, you know, came illegally here to ever become British. Very fast, like a rule change happens to kind of like shut down that argument. Then the next debate is like something else, and then like a little change is made to shut out that argument. Reform is saying we spend too much on foreign aid. You know, like I'm not saying this is the only reason, but like this kind of like now you can say back, well, we actually have reduced it without actually seeing the context behind it. So, and I have to say, like on foreign aid specifically, I don't have like very particularly strong views or a lot of detail on it. However, like the big part of it is this asylum hotel accommodation cost, which is, I was looking into like a paper like the other day. At the moment, the cost of like having someone in a hotel because of how, you know, the contracts work and how the system works overall, back in 2020 it was around below 20,000. It's around like 17,000 pounds a year. Now it's 41,000 pounds a year. So surely like there is a better model to deal with this, and this all into the foreign aid budget as well.
There's a better model, which is to upfront that stuff. I mean, in an age of technology, we find it increasingly impossible to process asylum applications appropriately and on time. That's what we've got to address, and it's a scourge throughout our society. Everything takes too long.
Yeah,
everything, and it's something we have to address. You know, to get you know, a housing development off the ground, a major housing development, you're talking about 5-6 years. You know, sometimes before they start to happen. You know, think about major projects and how slow we are to deliver them. And you know, before that, the battle we have for 10 years to fund them. All of this stuff we have to get to grips with, because the more efficient we get, the more we can shove the money up front instead of on consultants like me.
Is there any hangover from the Dolphin Hotels situation in St Ives? Is that something that comes up on the doorsteps? Because Dolphin Hotel was used for a few years, wasn't it? I think for Afghan refugees.
I have to say it didn't come up once, and the hotel is in the division. Obviously, it's been reopened now. They actually had a few weeks ago, like back to the Dolphin kind of like, you know, party time as well. And obviously now it's functional. However, I think I'm actually surprised how little it comes up on the door, and usually it comes up in the national context. Is like, you know, someone saying I'm disappointed with the national government's response on immigration. It can go either way. Either it's, you know, it's not good enough, we have to like remove everywhere from the country, like on the one end, or I'm actually disappointed it's like so far to the right compared to what Labour used to be, and so on. So it's a real like spectrum of opinion. I had very few occasions where someone said very, very negative things about immigration. It's always in the context of control, of people wanting to know more about, like, what is going on, are actually numbers going down, like is actually anything happening on small boats at all or not. I usually have the conversation, people tell me like, oh, you have to get off the door, and I just continue. Like I spoke to like the other week with someone for like about 20 minutes on this, just shared my views, said like, look, if I'm elected, whatever my personal view is, and I'm happy to express it to you, I can't change immigration policy as a councillor. That's just how it is. So then, you have to choose, like, you can vote for someone on the basis of you think their national view on immigration aligns better with yours, which is fair enough, but they won't be able to do anything at the council level to
the only sort of minor role the council can have is to be robust and to be excellent in the way that it does its age assessment work.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Also, though. So also that's part of my portfolio responsibility in Huntingdonshire, is that the government is continually asking us how to resettle more refugees in our areas. It's always kind of semi-voluntary, like you step forward and offer up places, or otherwise you are. They give you them one way or another, and so it's always slightly better to be proactive, because what you don't want to do is put people who don't have any transportation in little villages. You want them in places like St Ives, St Neots, or Huntingdon, which you've got relatively good surfaces, and you can thrive there, whereas you probably wouldn't do that in maybe Warboys or somewhere where if you haven't got a car, it's going to be difficult to get around. So we do get involved in those settlement schemes, but it's also almost like Hobson's choice. Like either you accept having these people live in your area and you control it, or you have them foisted upon you. And and there's lots more. There's another big resettlement scheme for Afghan refugees coming, and so there will be lots more in places.
And just going back to the overseas aid, it's also true that the more the world shrinks, the more that people will look at the West and look at the affluence within the West and want to move there. It's also true that although some people would love to deny it, that climate change is going to force more and more migration, and we just got to think twice about how we do it and get it right, because it's not going to stop.
And as you mentioned earlier, we've got a huge demographic problem in that we don't have enough current taxpayers to fund our state pension, which is why the pension age is going up and up and up. And it's almost lots of the people, I don't want to generalize, but lots of those kind of reform anti-immigration people are existing pensioners who all think that they paid their dues. What they don't understand is the state pension isn't something that you accumulate over your lifetime. People paying their social security payments now, or national insurance payments, are paying for current pensioners. You're not paying for your own pension. And like when you retire, Martin and I are much closer to that than Alex. I'm going to have to wait till I'm 67. Current workers are going to have to wait until they're in 70s, and it's almost like a Ponzi scheme. So the choice is between either retiring later and getting less, or getting good people to work here, pay taxes, and fund our state pension. And it's like it's a binary choice.
But also over the long term, start changing the way we fund pensions. And that's important too. I would love to see a drift towards basically people paying more for stakeholder pensions and relying less on state pensions as they get older, because it's a much more reliable scheme in my view. If we move that way, take the state out of it, but make sure that we still have the pensioners who are incredibly well off, I'd be all for it. But that's difficult.
Yeah.
And you've got to do it progressively. You can't just suddenly decide people ain't getting a state pension, especially when I'm 7 years away from mine.
You don't look it, Martin. You look far too young for that. So in terms of the local elections,
I feel it today.
what do we? So in terms of the county council elections, what do we think the outcome's going to be? Are you prepared to make any predictions, Alex? I think my view is that Reform are going to do rather better than we expect. Having seen the polling returns from the general election, I was surprised by the number of Reform voters in St Neots, which is fairly nice urban area, suburban area, in certain areas of town, they had really, really strong voting. That was a general election, and things are different in general election. But I do feel like they've, nationally, they've run a good campaign, and people are openly talking about supporting reform in the way they never used to do very often with UKIP. So I think that's going to be I don't think it's going to be a big influence in the mayoral election so much, but in the county council elections, I think people, especially since there's not so many independents around these days, there's almost like no protest vote. Because the parties are standing everywhere, and people are so disenfranchised with party politics, I think in general. Yeah, especially since we've been raging against a Conservative government for years and years and years, and then we get a new Labour government who seem to be even more deeply unpopular, at least on social media, than the previous government, which is largely ridiculous, I think, considering the amount of time they've been in power and some of the big changes they've made. Martin was urging them to be bold early on, and they have been quite bold, haven't they? And they have made some big changes and got some unpopular stuff out of the way. But it's not gonna help them at the ballot box. So I'm a bit nervous for Labour in general around here. But around here, I mean, apart from in St Ives and Hunsdon, where you're kind of building a bridgehead, in St Neots, there's very little Labour presence at all.
I mean, I definitely agree. I also think reform will overperform from what people expect. I think there's genuine chance for reform to take a number of seats. I would say anything between 3 to 4 to over 10, really realistically speaking, depending on how they do the work. But it would be no overall control in my view. I've always seen this. I don't see any scenario, based on my experience and calculations, where any party gets a majority. I know the Lib Dems put on every single leaflet they can get one. I don't think that's possible, looking at the types of seats and how many they need to still keep and win. The Greens will take 2 to 3 or 4 seats.
I can't see anything other than. Oh, sorry, Alex. So you were breaking up. I thought.
Go on.
Sorry. Yeah, I can't see anything apart from no overall control as the outcome. My concern is that the balance will be such that it's impossible to put together a coherent administration, and that concerns me a little bit. And the other concern I have is because of listening to Kemi Badenoch's comments the other week, which I thought was stupid about coalitions. There's the potential for the Conservatives and Reform to knit together to form a coalition, but I'm not sure those two together, I think, will be able to achieve anything, and we'll have the numbers either. But that's my big fear, is there won't be a way of putting together an administration, and how you make that work. I have real concerns about it, and I think the best we can hope for is the status quo is a reality.
Yeah.
Just to say on
I just want to say two things, by the way, about why I don't think a reform coalition is a good idea. And there's two. One, because they're reform, which is easy. The second one is they are a bunch of people that have got no experience of how a council runs at all. And if you throw them into a council with all the assumptions and that a lot of them are making during the campaign about what can be changed and whatever, it'll be a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, I'm always surprised by the number of people who are standing for county council who have never been elected at any level before as well, because it feels like it's quite a big step up. I like to see town and parish councillors, or at least who've had some experience being a councillor and understand how difficult it can be standing. But going from zero to being a county councillor, I think is a huge step. But unless you're going to sit on the back benches and not say anything and not do anything, I mean, it's
I have to say, when I was elected, it was my first campaign in 21. I had no experience, not only of being on any level, but no experience of working in politics or anything of the and also I came to politics to as being a single issue pretty much campaigner. I think also the difference is the ability to actually adapt and be sensible and work with others as well, because I came with some ideas which are totally unrealistic to do, and I thought if I get elected I can do this or that. I didn't put it on my leaflets, but I thought that, and when I realized how the council works and how long stuff takes, and how I'm not able to like immediately resurface this road or build this community center like the next year, and so on and so forth, then I was like, okay, like who should I work with to make this possible, or like make a little bit of a positive impact on those aspects in like 4 years time. So I quickly adapted, but some people won't necessarily adapt to that, will be like, oh, I promise I can do this, and I can't do any of this stuff, or I can't change the immigration policy, or I can't like resurface and fix every single road, as I wrote on my leaflet, which is not what they will be able to deliver either in their division. So then it becomes difficult if you don't really
and you know, you're getting into power and suddenly realize that actually the council does need translation services because it's doing things to people that they need to understand. You know, as a good example, because that's one of the things that Reform's thrown out there. But one of the dangers, one of the things I would say is the younger you are, typically, it's not true of everybody, the more teachable you are. And this is one of the things I talk about with councillors and planning committees quite a lot. You know, there's a reality that as you start to get older, it does become more difficult to learn. And I deliberately try and keep myself learning all the time, just to try and get in the mindset. But sometimes I find it bloody hard. I've been learning some new software because of this radio show I've been doing, and I've really struggled with it. It is really tough. And I say it with planning committees that, you know, there's no good teaching a planning committee and giving a planning committee training if the people that are on the planning committee are unteachable. And there's a reality to it. And so I think the younger you are, typically, the more teachable you are, the easier you'll adapt to it. You've got to have a bit more going to you than just youth if you want to do that. But I agree with Stephen. Going into the county council without any experience is really tough.
There's definitely a hierarchy in local politics. It's probably not a popular thing to say, but you know, it's not too difficult to get elected to town and parishes. Yeah, and you sometimes get people who perhaps shouldn't, you know, are not the best members of society getting elected as councillor, which is fine. It's democracy. Yeah, I'm not complaining about that. But you know, as you go up the levels, yeah, you get higher caliber politicians, I think, with bigger aspirations and more intellectual capacity. So there's some very impressive people at county council. There's fewer at district council, I think, and very few sometimes.
I would say there are a lot of people that are elected to district councils that shouldn't be.
Yeah,
as well. And less so. I wouldn't say there's none, but certainly less so at county. I have to say, you know, there are some people that at county I watched sit on the back benches for, you know, and never say a word. And my predecessor as a county councillor was a county councillor about 12 years. And I think he stood up in the chamber twice, you know, during full council and spoke. And we just don't need that. You need people that can contribute at county. And, you know, one of the things I hope is as we move towards unitaries is that we maintain the same quality of candidate as we've got at county, because by and large the standard of candidates is good. Some of the politics is a bit rubbish, but the standard is good.
So I'm not standing for my seat. I decided not to because of work commitments, also because I was genuinely disillusioned about the time commitments of being a county councillor and the amount you can improve people's lives in the kind of all-day county council meetings where we discussed stupid motions that changed nobody's lives. Kind of did it for me at all. And mainly because I thought it was going to be, when I was elected, I thought we could change the world and it could be an intellectual, you know, conversation about solving problems, and it never was. It was just pure tribalism 90% of the time, and people voting for things they didn't believe in sometimes as well, because that's what their team was doing, because they were in control or not in control or whatever, and that kind of depressed me.
One of the things I tried to do as leader during my short time as leader was break down the party whip a little bit sometimes and respond to motions and just break down the party whip and you know, the ones that really didn't matter, you know, in the mix of things to just free up the vote a little bit. But it was really hard to get that through my group, really tough. You know, the approach of the group at that time was, you know, we don't give anything to the Liberal Democrats. And I remember once we were going through some changes. It was the changes to the constitution to move towards the committee system, and they went through the council, and of course, you know, we opposed that stuff, and quite rightly too, actually. But within that, an amendment came forward at full council to change references to him, her, right? And I remember it came up, and I had guy next to me, adamant we should whip it and say no and vote against it. And I said, I really don't care. I'm not going to go through and whip this. I really don't care either way. And so it went through without a whip, but it was very, very close. And then I had the same thing. The guy next to me, the deputy leader, absolutely up in arms because we hadn't. If we'd have whipped it, we'd have got a couple more votes. We'd have won that. I don't bloody care. It's him, her. Can I just say, Dave Bagent has come on and said that it's a very arrogant view of district councillors. I'm really sorry, Dave. I see district councils all over the country, and I see them all the time. And what you want from me here is to say what I see, and that is what I see. There are some fantastic district councillors out there, but actually, overall, the quality isn't good enough.
There are some brilliant. So at Hunterston District Council, there are some brilliant district councillors on both sides of the chamber, and people I highly, highly respect. But there's also some people who are not cut out to be councillors, who can't do the casework. Is the other thing. I mean, and part of the reason why is they get elected on a party whip, because they needed candidates, they put them up, there wasn't enough people, and the wrong people got elected, and unfortunately, it's not a good qualification for running an administration as well. Sometimes,
and I have to say, it's true that there are a number of councils where I think the quality is good as well. Overall is good, and I think Hunts is one of them actually, where I think it's very, very good. And my view of Fenland is goes without saying. I think that the overall standard in Fenland is awful, really, really dreadful. And part of that is because of the lack of competition for seats.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things is like in areas where there's very little competition, you're not really incentivized to do a lot of work unless that's your kind of like your personal preference, right? Or like that's how you are used to. So for example, like in areas now, I actually think like in parliamentary seats as well, which are more marginal, this encourages MPs and opposition to put more work in as well, because like that you have to like keep it and compete and have something to show at the end of the 4 years. If you're like on a majority of like 30,000, or if you're like unopposed in elections at district or at whatever level, it's kind of like up to you, like how much, or you don't feel pressured to deliver like a lot of stuff. And I think that's wrong, because I think you shouldn't really be into politics if you don't actually want to do your casework or like respond to people or like be proactive. But there's very little incentive for that, whereas if we have elections on the county council, which I think is very good, where you have 6 candidates rather than like 2 or 3 like in the past. And actually this encourages all the different parties to do a bit more, to do their at least a leaflet, or at least to do something locally to put their argument across and why people should vote for their candidate. And I think that's healthy for democracy. Obviously, if you're like uncontested, like why and you think there's 2 parties and you'll win anyway because you have 70% of the vote, why should you even deliver a leaflet or door knock in the area? I still would do it because I like door knocking all year round, but like not everyone would.
Yeah, I mean, I snuck in. So it's changed since 4 years ago, and I think there's the change in MPs locally in the parliamentary campaign recently means we've got much more active political campaigning. When I got in by 9 votes 4 years ago, and it was against 3 other candidates, 2 of whom were paper candidates basically. So it was me versus Conservatives. Yeah, and if I hadn't have stood, it would have been a shoe in for the Conservatives. And so, but this year I have. So you might not have seen the leaflets in Whittlesea, Martin, but I've seen leaflets with bar graphs on from every single political party. Don't think the Conservatives are campaigning really hard around here. Lib Dem's not campaigning as hard as they used to in the general election, and so it's going to be an interesting outcome. And yeah, I really welcome it. I think having more candidates and choosing the best candidate. I mean, I wish we could vote for the best candidate, and not just the political party we support. And I'll say this for my seat, which I'm not standing in, I'm going to be supporting the Green candidate,
Lara Davenport-Ray, because I've worked with her at District Council over the last few years, and I think she's one of the best councillors I've ever met. Yeah, and probably will be an upgrade over me at County Council. So that's who I'm going to be voting for in the County Council elections.
I've a lot of time for Lara. She's fitted into that little role she's taken on in the cabinet. Really, really. Well, I say little role. It's not a little role, but she's taken on that role within cabinet at Hunts really, really well. Absolutely. I would agree with that.
She's also not. She's in a group of one, really, part of the joint administration. But she's also a very, very challenging individual, and she'll always say what she believes, and she's always, I describe her in a nice way as a shit stirrer, because but she gets stuff done by challenging us, inside cabinet as well, and that's what makes a difference. She's not quiet and passive, which is another poor trait in character in a council.
Yeah, well, it's a reality with that environment role that she's got, that it is all encompassing. It does impinge on every aspect of the council's policy, or at least it should, and I think it does in Huntingdonshire, and so you would expect her to be, sticking her finger in everything.
So we should probably move on, because we said we're going to finish at 8:30, and it's getting very close to that. Ready to the mayoral.
3 minutes.
How do we think the mayoral elections are going at the moment?
I still think it's too close to call. I've got some odds in front of me that came out a few days ago that have Paul Bristow at 2-5 on, and Lorna Dupre at 5-2, Anna Smith at 8-1, Reform at 14-1, and Greens at 100-1. I think, broadly speaking, they're about right, but I think it's closer than that. And it all depends exactly who Reform take votes from, in my view.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it depends on Reform's performance in the north of the county and on South Cambs, and how much because South Cambs has a huge Liberal Democrat vote, and whether that vote translates to any kind of so-called tactical voting or some type of that voting, or whether it stays predominantly Lib Dem. I think really what decides are whether Cambridge holds up for Labour, what happens in Peterborough, the tactical voting or lack thereof in South Cambs, and how well Reform perform in the north of the county. And I think I agree with Martin, it's too close to call. Like, I can even see, because we have the number of candidates we have, I think there are situations where someone can win on like high 20s, or like on 27-28% of the vote, or even a bit lower, and this makes it possible for even Reform to win, in my view, because of how the vote could split. And it depends on turnout in Peterborough as well, because Peterborough doesn't have county elections and a range of other things.
It's the thing that I fear quite a lot is the fact that you've got a candidate winning in the high 20s in terms of voter turnout, and then sitting around a table and trying to make a decision, and people saying you've only got a mandate from a quarter of the county. And I can see that happening. That's why I'm really disappointed by the fact that this isn't being done by first past the post. I'm sure whoever wins will be delighted that delighted that it is first past the post, and not some sort of second preference system. But I fear for it, because one of my views is that whoever is the mayor, the first thing they've got to be able to do is to sit down and work with other people, and having 27% of the vote, it doesn't help your ability to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it can even mirror the national split at the moment as well. Like, I'm not saying the exact same order, but like, we have the recent polling, Reform on about 26, then like Labour on 23, Tories on 20, and then Greens on around 10, and Lib Dems around like 15. It won't be the same order in the mayoral, but you can have like an even like mid-20s percentage of actually winning, like, well, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough mayor of this. So yes, indeed, we can end up in a situation where the mayor has a quarter of the vote and 3/4 of the population of our area didn't vote for them. So it will be very interesting.
Yeah, I fear for that, and I hope all of the candidates, because we've said it's too close to call, are thinking about how they're going to approach the first days in office, and how they're going to deal with that issue. it's because it's the most important thing. Because the other thing we can't afford to have happen is for that office to stall again at the beginning of whoever the new mayor is. We just can't.
I spent some time with Rob Ridge, who's the chief exec. I spent like an hour with him, and I was really quite impressed with him. And like, it's a completely different organisation than the one that Nick inherited, isn't it? With a proper staff, proper budgets, a good chief executive now. And so he basically inherited a broken organisation with nothing and people who were appointees, I think, almost like political appointees, largely of the previous regime. And like, they didn't know what they were doing. Nick and his team, such as he had a team, didn't know what they were doing going in at day one. And I think whoever inherits this role this time will have a much better organisation to surround them. And much more power as well, because government's investing in local authorities. So I'm optimistic that that's not going to be the case. And I think Nick will say his biggest achievement is bus franchising, but I think his biggest achievement is turning around that combined authority into a credible, or starting to be credible, level of local government. And so I think that should be one of his proudest achievements. I do. But it would be easy to break it, though, as well. I agree. It would be easy to break it.
I absolutely agree. And I agree with everything you said about Rob. I've known Rob a long, long time, and he's a class act. And, that is the big benefit they've got. But that still doesn't change the fact that the mayor has got an agenda to deliver, and he cannot do that on his own. And that's what I mean by stalling. It's when you're sitting around that combined authority board and you're needing people to stick their hands up in support of a progress, and you can't achieve it, and that will stall the mayor. And there's only so much Rob can do about that.
Well, on that note, shall we go to work? Or complaining?
Because Dave Bajan quite rightly has had some challenge. And Dave, I don't have any problems with that. And I have a lot of time with your leader, by the way. Dave, if you want to get in touch with me, get in touch and we'll have a chat about it, and we'll have a coffee sometime. I have no truck with what you said about Cambridge City. I know enough about it, but get in touch. You can get hold of me on Facebook. Probably the best one is Martin Curtis, Better Politics, and we'll meet for a coffee, mate.
But I think let's finish off by saying we should all be asking for better local councillors. As people doing an amazing job, basically as semi-volunteers, it's not a job for anybody, but we should be asking to get the best possible people elected to run our councils, because they're all facing the sort of economic problems which would challenge any business in the UK as well. And so I think getting the best people involved in solving casework problems, but up to running councils, is really, really important. And we've asked that there's lots of really good councillors, but not all of them are up to.
And I would say this: if you've got a business watching as well, and somebody that's running a business that's got employees, you will have better employees for encouraging them to stand for council, whether they're elected or not, actually. But if they're elected and they get involved in council business, you'll have better employees as a result of it, and you should be encouraging it, not trying to prevent it, as some do.
So on that note, good luck next week to everybody who's standing, but especially Alex, because we're biased.
Especially.
And she'll need it. Let's be honest. Probably won't be on next week, well, because you're going to be at the count. Maybe
I'll be at the count, so maybe depending on whether I need to sleep or not after, actually doing a post-count result.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's see if we can check in and talk about the results when they come in, because they should be available by mid-afternoon, shouldn't they? At the latest, usually. Depends. You're doing the mayoral count first, so that
I don't know exactly what I'm doing next Friday, but yeah, I mean, in terms of a podcast or whatever, that should be good.
Right. So we'll see you on the other side. Have a lovely weekend.
Cheers. All the best, Alex.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.